Story 1. Richard Chase, the vampire of Sacramento, was deeply schizophrenic and once described his condition as feeling like someone was sneaking up on him from the inside. He is the reason I always make sure the doors in my house stay locked. Story 2. The Junko Furuta case genuinely stayed with me for months. My heart goes out to that poor girl. I cannot imagine the pain she had to endure. This case is absolutely horrendous to read about. Story 3. Ellen Greenberg and the West Memphis 3 case. Ellen Greenberg is a shocking case. Essentially, this woman, Ellen Greenberg, was found in her locked apartment stabbed to death. The authorities ruled it a suicide, which makes absolutely no sense given that there were stab wounds on her back. The West Memphis 3 case angers me. The young boys who were murdered did not receive justice, and the teenagers who were accused had their lives ruined. Now the state of Arkansas is delaying justice by refusing to conduct DNA tests on evidence. Additionally, they claimed that numerous pieces of evidence were destroyed in a fire, yet this evidence was later found in the basement of a government building. Story 4. Rachel Hoffman. She was a Florida State University graduate who was arrested for possessing marijuana and ecstasy. Facing prison time, the police offered her the opportunity to work as an undercover informant in a sting operation. The entire operation was undermanned, and there were communication issues between her and the officers, which ultimately resulted in her being killed by the 2 dealers she was with. Story 5. Gabriel Fernandez could have been saved many times. My biggest concern is Michael and Alexander Smith. When Susan Smith decided to strap her sons in their car seats and let that car sink into a lake, I was a new mother of 2 young sons. I remember watching her first television press conference. Her demeanor was off in some way, as my mother and I discussed. Then, days later, when she confessed, my parents' house was essentially in mourning. It was beyond comprehension for my mother and me that anyone could do this to their babies. My mother cut out the colored pictures of Michael and Alexander from our New York Daily News, and those pictures were on her refrigerator along with all the family pictures until the day my mother died 10 years later. Story 6. Yuba County 5. One person dying mysteriously or going missing is unusual. 5. Now that's significant. They never found the 5th man's body. He is just gone. Story 7. The JonBenet Ramsey case in Colorado raises many questions. Did her brother kill her? Why did the district attorney not press charges against him? Was there police incompetence regarding the evidence? The DNA evidence found on the victim's clothes, was it relevant? The case remains unsolved. She was 6 years old. Story 8. Apparently, someone poisoned Tylenol in the 1990s and has never been caught. It makes me wonder if the world gets any more messed up. Someone might start poisoning our food. Story 9. Dakota Collins was a 10-year-old boy who suffered horrific physical, sexual, and emotional abuse at the hands of his father and others. He was confined to a pitch-black attic, constantly starved, waterboarded, and beaten beyond recognition. He was forced to hold poses for hours in the dark while under surveillance and made to eat his own feces as punishment when he inevitably collapsed to the floor. The other people in the house witnessed his father's assaults and did nothing to intervene. They acted as if they had done nothing wrong and even blamed the innocent child. It is profoundly disturbing, and I sincerely hope the adults in that house face justice for their actions. Story 10. Currently, Carol Ryan is from Syracuse, New York. In 1996, she was left for dead after an explosive device, thought to be a type of firecracker, was inserted inside her and detonated following a brutal assault. Her injuries were so horrific that emergency room workers who attempted to save her required counseling afterward. The case remains unsolved. Story 11. Having lived and socialized in La Crosse, Wisconsin, during the systematic drowning deaths of young small-framed men, most people, except for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, college spokespersons, administrators, investigators, and law enforcement, believed it was a serial killer. I remember walking home after the bar, and men avoided each other. People literally crossed the street to avoid walking past others. Many students were on edge. One night, while walking down Pearl Street to meet some friends at the casino lounge, a guy in a storefront right next to a dark alleyway, a big man in a trench coat, called out, "Hey, I got something for you," Come here. I looked at him, saw his large hands, and responded, Nope, I'm good. I kept walking while he continued to say odd things like, No, look, it's something shiny. I just kept on walking. When I arrived at the casino, my friends were there, and I immediately told them about the guy. I must have been passionate because a couple of nearby tables joined us as we went back out to take a closer look at him. Unfortunately, by the time we got there, he was gone. Literally a week later, another guy was found in the river. This was between 1997 and 2000. Fast forward to the young woman in Madison who was found stabbed in her apartment in 2008. I was living and working in Madison at that time, and it was heavily covered in the news. Around the same time, Edward Lanphier was arrested for abducting and sexually assaulting two young men near Wisconsin Rapids. He was mentioned in the Madison news only because, after police raided his house, they found a picture of the young woman mentioned above. Out of curiosity, I looked up this person and, to my surprise, he resembled the weirdo in the trench coat who had been offering shiny things to passing strangers. After seeing his photo and doing some research, I reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding my theory, but I never heard back. Sometime last year, after discussing this with someone, I learned that the FBI did come to La Crosse but didn't turn up anything. More recently, I had a discussion about this with David Paulides, the author of the Missing 411 book series. I wish I still had those emails. It was an interesting exchange. If I remember correctly, he believed that something else, not a serial killer, was abducting these young men. This doesn't keep me up at night, but it still bothers me. I wonder how many times people go missing or are killed, and due to laziness or incompetence, their cases get dismissed, misappropriated, or forgotten. I realize I could be drawing parallels or seeing patterns that are merely coincidence, but it is all rather intriguing. Story 12, Missy Beavers. How is her killer on video and we still haven't caught them? We don't even know if it was a male or female. The mystery lingers with me. Story 13. I am fairly desensitized to most things, but Hinterkaifeck frightens me to the extent that when I first read about it at night, I had to turn on the lights to be able to sleep. The whole situation is so eerie. Even the name creeps me out for some reason. Regarding the unsolved mystery, I often think about the Springfield 3, among many others. Story 14. Wendy Volleen, Elizabeth, New Jersey, March 1966. She was just waiting outside for her mother when a man approached and attacked her with a knife. She and other witnesses initially thought she had been punched until they got her into the firehouse and examined her more closely. As far as I know, no suspect was ever named. Story 15. JonBenet Ramsey. The fact that it is still unsolved and the possibility that her family may have been involved, along with the planted evidence, makes me sick to my stomach. Story 16. Gannon Stauch was a young boy from my hometown who went missing. It was discovered that his stepmother brutally murdered him using several different weapons, then placed him in a suitcase and discarded his body over a bridge in Florida. He was only 11 years old. I am connected to some people who interacted with her while she was in jail. She was reportedly flirtatious with male deputies and tried to act insane. I hope she faces the consequences of her actions. A couple of commenters informed me that this case did receive national attention. Story 17. The West Memphis 3 case is unlikely to ever be solved, and the murders of the 3 8-year-old boys will always be overshadowed by what happened to the teenagers wrongfully accused of their killings. There was significant incompetence, corruption, and selfish behavior by the police, district attorney, witnesses, and the Arkansas Supreme Court. Evidence was destroyed, people's lives were ruined, and grassroots movements made efforts to prevent 3 more children from dying in prison. While the teenagers, now adults, are free, they were never apologized to, never compensated, and their convictions were never overturned. They will forever be on record as murderers, while the real killers remain unpunished. The 8-year-old boys will never receive justice, and no one in the Arkansas justice system seems to care. Story 18. Wording this carefully for privacy reasons. There was a serial killer in my area who was suspected of at least 5 killings, and he was only caught because the last victim was found in a remote area where all the evidence pointed to him. No one except for his family suspected him until then. The reason being he worked full-time, was very pleasant and friendly, and treated women well in public. The reason he was so careful was that he knew how harsh the prisons are in my region and did not want to serve time. There was a horror movie based on his life. I could tell because at the end, the fictionalized version of him was picking another victim through work. He was a good example of a psychopath who masked well. The majority of people were not creeped out by him. Story 19. The Lori and Chad Daybell case is just insane. What keeps me up at night is wondering how much of their beliefs they actually held, and which one of them, if not both, truly believed in the bizarre ideas they promoted. When extreme belief systems and narcissism are involved, it is difficult to determine if they are genuinely delusional or if they are so psychopathic that they create outrageous stories to manipulate others for financial gain. I know a narcissist in real life, and it is confusing because I believe they know the truth deep down, yet they have a strange way of convincing themselves of their delusions. Story 20. Brooklyn Farthing. I saw something about her many years ago. I check at least once a year for updates. I wish they would find her. Story 21. Larry Hall. I don't believe he was the actual murderer. His twin, Gary Hall, is cunning and manipulative and gives off a much more intense psycho vibe. In my opinion, they either killed together or Larry, who is somewhat challenged and socially awkward and idolizes his twin brother, was manipulated into admitting to these crimes. Story 22. I knew this woman personally when I was young. She and her family were friends of my family. One day, Shannon just disappeared after getting into an argument with her boyfriend, who everyone called Big Scott, a known drug dealer in the area who wasn't above violence. Everyone knows he killed her, but nobody could prove it, and everyone was scared to talk. Story 23. William Tyrell. I was local to where he disappeared from. I always suspected that the foster parents were involved in his disappearance. The story about him being randomly abducted from that property was too far-fetched for me to believe. After many years of the case remaining unsolved, a royal commission began investigating the police work and quickly discovered that crucial evidence provided by the foster parents had been tampered with. Sadly, it has been a few more years since then, and it seems that all evidence has evaporated into thin air. The foster parents know what happened, but whether it was an accident or something more, we may never know. Story 24. David Parker Ray, known as the Toy Box Killer, used soundproofing methods on a semi-trailer that he referred to as his toy box, equipping it with items for sexual torture. He would kidnap about 4 or 5 women each year, holding them captive for approximately 2 to 3 months. During this time, he sexually abused and often tortured his victims with surgical instruments, sometimes involving his friend's wife or even his male dog in the acts. After keeping them captive for a few months, Ray would drug the victims with barbiturates in an attempt to erase their memories before abandoning them by the side of a road. Story 25. The Moscow student murders in Idaho have been a concern since the beginning, and they have kept me up at night on several occasions. It is frightening to consider that 4 university students were taken away so mercilessly. It is a tragic situation. Story 26. Elisa Lam. I don't fully believe it's a crime anymore. I think she was just a woman off her medication who made a horrible mistake. That being said, the video of her in the elevator is the scariest thing I've ever seen. It was so unsettling that I remember once talking to a friend about it, and she made the hand gesture to ask if that was the video. It freaked me out so much that I couldn't sleep. Story 27. The story is about a good-looking handyman who killed 3 women, a mother, her daughter, and the daughter's friend, in their motel room. I believe it happened near a national park in the United States. Ever since I learned about this story, I worry when the women in my family travel. I don't want to plant negative ideas in their minds that could ruin their vacations, but I want them to be extra cautious and never open their room doors for anyone. Story 28. The BTK is a chilling reminder of the simplicity of his real-life persona. It sends chills down the spine to think about how many seemingly normal-looking killers are around us all the time. Story 29. The interrogation of Ryan Waller. He repeatedly tells the interrogator, "I got shot, man. I don't know. Just leave me alone." Ryan and his girlfriend Heather were killed by her ex-roommate or her ex-boyfriend. She died, and he survived a gunshot wound to the eye and head. After close to an hour of interrogation, the detective finally listens to him and examines his face and head, realizing he had been shot. Ryan survived for several months but ultimately died because of his injuries. This case makes me extremely upset every time I hear about it. Rest in peace, Ryan. Story 30. Go watch The Misery Machine on YouTube if you can stomach true crime against children. The real reason I love their channel is that all of the cases they present highlight the horrendous criminal acts that Child Protective Services and family courts have committed against families and their children, who end up dead. Story 31. I can mention 2 cases that have not been covered by anyone, but I guarantee they would be talked about by everyone. Gabriel Beechin and the Greensboro man sentenced to 3,000 years in prison. Story 32. Graham Latcher is a missing man from Maine. He was a patient at a mental health facility and left while on a supervised walk in the woods. The police and the facility did not conduct a proper search until days later. It has been 2 years since he disappeared, and there has been no sign of him. A grown man has simply vanished. It hurts my heart to see his mother post about him on social media. She seems to be the only one still looking for him. Story 33. Israel had kill kits all across America. No one really knows how many people he killed. I used to enjoy camping in secluded areas until I learned more about him. Story 34. Chris Watts and how casually he annihilated his entire family over an affair. His affair partner, Nicole Kessinger, needs to be investigated further. I firmly believe she knew what was happening and may have helped in some capacity. Story 35. The Springfield 3 is an eerie case that remains unsolved. How do 3 adult women go missing without a trace? Numerous mistakes made by investigators led to the loss of valuable evidence, and it is unlikely we will ever know what happened. Story 36. There is something about Robert Hendy Freegard, known as the Puppet Master, making his victims listen to Duran Duran repeatedly as he moved them from place to place that sticks with me. Story 37. The Black Dahlia, also known as Elizabeth Short, deeply impacted me. The mystery of her unsolved murder and the cruelty she endured are unsettling. Her story, along with any crime involving children, haunts me and evokes a profound sympathy for the victims. Story 38. Not an addict, but there is a great 1 to 1.5 hour documentary about Ed Kemper. I stopped watching content like this afterward. Story 39. Richard Chase would try the door, and if it was locked, he would walk away. However, if it was unlocked, he believed it meant he was welcome to enter and harm whoever was inside. This makes me lock my door and think about him every time I don't. Story 40. Not sure if Elon's school qualifies as true crime. It was a troubled teen camp with a history of abuse and deaths. Truly a horrifying place. A YouTuber did a video on it. The camp was incredibly difficult to escape from, but a few kids managed to do so over the years. One of the girls, Dawn, was 17 when she escaped. The camp is in the middle of nowhere, so she hiked through the woods for miles before finding a road, where she tried to hitchhike home. She flagged down a truck driver who promised to take her home. He raped and murdered her before dumping her body. The story of this girl, who was sent to a horrific camp and went through months or years of torture, managing to escape against all odds only to encounter someone who would cause her further harm, is profoundly unfair and difficult to accept. Story 41. The murders of Julie and Robin Carey were tragic. They were young and progressive, and it is heartbreaking. The world truly wasn't ready for them. Story 42. No crimes keep me up at night, but I am interested to know what happened to Jason Derrick Brown. He was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list for a long time. He killed a security guard and stole about $50,000 in cash. I wonder if he is still alive, and if so, what he is doing. I hope to see an article one day about him being caught. Story 43. I'm listening to the Radio Murders podcast, and it's incredibly disturbing how many women go missing in Juarez while the police do not seem to care. Story 44. The story of Megan Rose Hyatt. In 2015, Megan Rose Hyatt's boyfriend, Navy sailor Gawain Wilson, killed their twin baby daughters and her father in front of her, then shot her and took his own life. She survived and now speaks out against domestic violence. Story 45. I don't even want to discuss the ones I naively read about in an author's book series, which provided fair warning about one of its books. I can't even bring myself to talk about it. Anything involving children, I can't. Story 46. Victoria Martins was killed by her mother and her mother's boyfriend on her 11th birthday. Before they strangled her to death, they injected her with methamphetamine and sexually assaulted her. This left me crying for days. I cannot bring myself to look up the details again, but there was much more to the story. Story 47. My local case in Seattle involving David Morgan and Brenda Welch is serious. The man attacked her and then set the house on fire. You never know when someone you love may have violent tendencies. Story 48. The former owner of the Phillip Island Grand Prix track in Australia possibly murdered his wife. The case is a significant controversy and was sealed by the courts. We may never know the truth. Story 49. Corin Rainey was here in Perth, Western Australia in August 2007. She vanished after a dance class and was found buried in a shallow grave in Kings Park. Her husband was charged but found not guilty. It has been almost 20 years, and still no one is in jail for that. Story 50. Cherish Periwinkle. The CCTV footage that accompanies it is heartbreaking. I hope that monster suffers immensely for what he did. Story 51. Jessica Lunsford was kidnapped from her bedroom by John Cooey, a convicted child sex offender with a long criminal history. 2 other individuals in a trailer denied knowing she was there. Police also visited while she was held captive but did not search. He buried her alive. It was heartbreaking. I lived nearby. My grandmother and I watched and hoped she would be found. That individual died peacefully in prison shortly after his conviction. Story 52. Sylvia Likens. Enough said. The Ken and Barbie killers. She helped her husband rape and murder her underage sister and essentially got away with it. Fred and Rose West. There was a significant amount of incest, rape, and torture involving many victims. In the 1980s, there was a woman who was held in a basement for many years, with her head locked in a box and only let out to be beaten and raped. The wife of the perpetrator knew all along. She eventually escaped but suffered severe aftereffects from all the abuse. Story 53. Fred and Rose West are 2 of the most repulsive individuals I have ever heard of, both of whom came from disturbed and depraved families. I cannot imagine what it must have been like to be one of their children growing up in that environment. Albert Fish is another troubling example. It is beyond comprehension how someone could become as disturbed as he was. Story 54. Med student Brian Schaefer walked into a popular bar in downtown Columbus, Ohio, which had 1 entrance and 1 exit, and was never seen again. Cameras captured him entering, and then he disappeared. Story 55. Kendrick Johnson. Whether it was an accident or he was killed, thinking about him stuck upside down in that rolled-up mat breaks my heart. Story 56. Some hate them, but of course, there are unsolved crimes. Lars Mittank, Peggy Knobloch, Madeline McCann, Frock Leaps, Yagzi Fall, and Jack the Ripper. Story 57. The strange case of Josh Maddox is not notable for the fact that he was killed, but rather for the manner in which it happened and how the scene was discovered, which is incredibly unusual. Story 58. The German psychiatrist was held in a prison. She was assaulted by an inmate for 8 hours because the tactical team did not attempt to storm the room. She survived and wrote a book about her experience to aid in her healing. She went on a book tour to help other survivors of assault. Tragically, after a few years, she could not overcome her trauma and took her own life. I wish the perpetrators would suffer eternally for their actions. However, in this country, the system often harms the victims more than it punishes the offenders. Story 59. Lauren Kavanaugh. I had to look up her last name because I couldn't remember it. These parents should have been publicly held accountable for their actions. She endured so much trauma in the first 6 years of her life that her vaginal and anal openings were significantly affected. She shared her story on Oprah years ago. Her early childhood was filled with unimaginable suffering. Story 60. Robert and Dave Picton, not only because it's close to home, but also because they took someone I knew. The corruption and incompetence of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were astounding. Story 61. Last year, I heard a podcast episode about the strange circumstances surrounding the death of Gwen Hasselquist. I explored the topic in detail, writing a post in the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. The medical examiner ruled her cause of death as suicide, but Gwen's friends, family, and some police officers who worked the case believe her husband murdered her. One aspect of the case that bothers me is its obscurity. She lived in a town of 12,000 people, and a few commenters in that thread mentioned they lived there at the time of her death. My write-up 4 years later was the first time they ever heard her name. It is a fascinating case with many unusual details that I find challenging to summarize in brief discussions, and it was the case that turned me into a true crime enthusiast. I would encourage anyone interested in this topic to read the full thread. Story 62. Without question, the Toolbox Killers and William Bonin had a profound impact on me. I discovered those cases back to back, and I have not been the same since. Story 63. Let's see. Zodiac, Maura Murray, The Burger Chef Murders, JFK, and The Boys on the Tracks. I don't sleep much. Story 64. The Springfield 3 is a case I often think about. It was named after Springfield, Missouri, and I heard about it frequently while growing up. 3 high school girls disappeared one day, and to this day, there has been no information about what happened to them, and no bodies have ever been discovered. The closest we have come to a lead is that a disturbance was found using ground-penetrating radar in a parking garage. However, it remains uncertain if this disturbance is related to the case, and they cannot excavate it due to the structure. Story 65. David Ray Parker, known as the Toy Box Killer, owned a trailer so horrifying that the woman assigned to catalog its contents took her own life afterward. He evaded justice, dying before his trial, while his accomplices were never held accountable. The situation transcended a mere lack of justice. We remain unaware of the total number of his victims. One surviving victim only realized she had been abducted when the FBI released a photo of a tattoo from Parker's personal archive that matched her own. Story 66. Daisy's Destruction. I am currently writing a paper on this topic. I was quite young when the incident occurred, and I found a lot of disturbing content on the dark web during a time when accessing it was easier. Story 67. Lucy Let By. I know there is a lot of media surrounding this, trying to convince people she is innocent. However, I sat through years of material and months of trials, and honestly, she is a dark, twisted individual. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.